I'm going to hand over introduction to Laura Branner. So go ahead, Laura.
Hi, welcome. This is Laura, and I'm the coordinator of the Local Immigration Partnership. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker this afternoon, Tina Meggison. Tina was born in Nuevo Ideal,
Angela's supposed
Durango.
to be on this meeting and she's not.
Sorry?
I think you're good, Laura. Somebody was just not muted.
Sorry. And lived in a Low German Mennonite community. There was no indoor plumbing, electricity, or motorized vehicles. Her family attended the Old Colony Church, which was very conservative until she was 16 years old. She is the fourth child out of 12 and the oldest girl, with a total of 7 boys and 5 girls. Her family moved to Canada when Tina was 4. She attended public school in Ontario until they moved to Alberta 18 years ago. When Tina was 11, and having been in Canada for 7 straight years, her family went back to Mexico and lived there for 2.5 years. It was a big culture shock to return to such a simple lifestyle with having to draw water from a well, do laundry with a washboard, and so on. Tina is married to a police sergeant, and together they have an 18-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 10-year-old. They live in Tabor, which has a huge population of Low German Mennonite families. Tina has worked as a community health representative for almost 6 years and works specifically with the Low German Speaking Mennonite community. So we're happy to have you and welcome, Tina.
Thank you, Laura, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking part in this presentation. We can go on to the next slide, please, Dasha. So just a little bit of my background. Laura already gave you some background there, but I was 4 when we moved to Canada, which is, I'm guessing, why I don't have an accent. I've been speaking English since I was 4, and I did not go to high school, so I definitely don't have that same education that some of our Canadian friends would have, but I did get my GED, and we will talk a little bit about education in the LGM coming up. So this is a picture, the one on the top right is my family before we left Mexico, so before I would have ever been to Canada, and I'm the girl in the blue dress. I have 3 older brothers, and then the other picture on the left is when we went back to Mexico when I was 11. So the dress that we have on the bottom left picture you can see is quite different from the LGM families that you would see in this area, and the reason is most of the families in Alberta are from Chihuahua, Mexico, and dress differently. I'm from Durango, Mexico, so there's a difference in the dress styles there. Next slide, please. So what I do, or what Trudy and I do, and Trudy's not with us today, usually we present together, and what that does, it just shows you the diversity within the community, within the LGM community. She's also grown up in the LGM community, but her story is very different from mine. So what we do, though, together is we interpret for our families at doctor's visits or doctor's appointments, just to reduce the language barrier and to better facilitate communication between doctor and patient. Obviously, health is important for the families to understand exactly where they stand, and also less frustrating, hopefully, for the doctors if they're able to communicate properly. We are also always working to promote health and health preventative measures to our families, so we've created a number of videos that are on YouTube, and we're always working on creating more on various health topics. And then, of course, like we are today, we provide cultural presentations to service providers. Next slide, please. So Alberta has become home to many LGM families. There's upwards of 20,000 LGM in southern Alberta. So there's quite a few. I would say about as many or more than we would have Indigenous. And so if you're working in southern Alberta or anywhere in Alberta, really, you most likely will run into or work with these families in some capacity. Most have come from Mexico. Like I said, most families in this area are from Chihuahua, Mexico, but there is also families here from Belize, Bolivia, and other areas down south. Our families are spread far and wide at this point. So as I said, no matter what field you work in, chances are you will end up working with them in some capacity. And then, of course, whenever we're working with a group of people, it's good to understand their history, beliefs, values, convictions, so that we can better work with and have services for our families. We do say, though, not to paint the whole culture with the same brush. There's a lot of diversity within the culture, but generally they are a conservative people in dress, technology, values, church, and family life. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So I won't go too far into the religious history. There will be some links at the end of the presentation that if you are interested in more of the history, you can take a look at that on your own time. But basically there was a break from the Catholic Church back in the 1500s and they became the Anabaptist. The reason at the time for the split was they didn't believe in baby baptism. They believed in adult baptism. They believed the adults or the person being baptized should know what they're doing, and then also a pacifist group of people not wanting to go to war, etc. Menno Simons did not start this movement, but he did join later on and became the leader, and that's where Mennonites, the name comes from. So there was lots of discrimination, lots of people that were put to death by different governments and churches, and so as a result there's been a lot of fear in the culture, a lot of distrust of government, and there's been a lot of moving from country to country, so definitely a lot of faith-based moves originally. Nowadays we're seeing more of the moving due to financial needs or more one family at a time and not the mass groups moving at a time. Next slide, please. So we'll talk a little bit about the religion today. High German was what they were usually reading and writing in, and then Low German is the language they spoke at home. And the Bible is now available in Low German in this culture, but it's fairly new. It's not been in print for too long. I believe it's been maybe 20 years now, but on the right there on this slide, that's the Gothic script. So when I went back to Mexico when I was 11 and I'd learned how to read and write English in Canada, and then all of a sudden I had to learn how to read and write in Gothic script in a High German, which we didn't speak at home and therefore wasn't a language that I knew. So that was quite challenging. Most of our families don't understand the High German fluently. They will hear the High German in churches, and for the children going to school, they do learn this language, but it's not a language they converse in, so it's difficult to communicate with that language. And also at home they're always just speaking Low German, so if they're not using this High German language, then they will lose it pretty quickly. So definitely the religion is, oh, go back to that last slide for a sec. It's strict, but with varying beliefs. There's, like we said earlier, it's a difficult group to generalize, so you can have many different pockets of different church groups, and therefore different levels, I guess, of faith or strictness. And then, of course, different depending on province or country. So the Old Colony Church in Alberta is said to be stricter than the one in Ontario, for instance, as well as between Durango, Mexico, and Chihuahua, Mexico. The Old Colony Church would differ greatly between the two. Next slide. So these are just some of the current churches we have in southern Alberta. There is more, but these are the main ones. So if we're putting it on a scale from conservative to liberal, and of course liberal would not be what we would think of it in Canadian society, definitely not. It would still be quite conservative, but the Old Colony Church is most definitely the most conservative, and that's what my family was raised in, is the Old Colony. And then we have the Friedensfelder, Sommerfelder, Rhinelander, Kleingemeinde in between there, and then the EMMC or EMC, which are evangelical churches at the liberal end. And you will see many different church groups here in southern Alberta. So if you have a family in your clinic room or wherever it might be, they could be from the Old Colony, and yet somebody within the same family could be at the EMC. So quite a difference in even just one family. Next slide, please. This is just a picture to show you Mexico. So the top arrow says Trudy's hometown. So Trudy's my coworker, for those of you that don't know. And so she's from Chihuahua area. And there's not a huge distance between the two. As you can see, Nuevo Ideal is where where I was born and partially raised, the bottom arrow. So they're not too far apart, and yet considerable differences between the two. And then there's different pockets of Low German Mennonite colonies, and we'll go into the colony term a little bit later, but there's definitely all over southern Alberta, South America rather, where we've got pockets of our LGM. Next slide, please. So we do talk about our families not really having a home country. They've been on the move for as long as they've been in existence, whether it be because of different violences in the areas that they're from, or discrimination and distrust of government. So they've been on the move for a long time and may feel like they don't know exactly where they belong or where their home is. And therefore, often our families can feel quite lost. So of course they started in the European countries, came to Canada, the United States, moved to Mexico, Paraguay, Belize, Bolivia, those areas, and now we see a lot of them returning back to Canada and the United States. Often our clients will tell us stories of Mexico in the Chihuahua area, especially with all of the increased violence. I've had clients tell me things like there'd be a wagon or a flatbed in town with human heads on it, and there would be a sign hanging from it saying you're next and you know who you are. So definitely a lot of violence, a lot of fear in that area. Sometimes families will have members of a gang show up on their yard and say either you take this package from A to B or we kill your family. And of course there's a lot of fear around that, but there's also going to be families that are knowingly entering into this sort of atmosphere or into with the gang business, always looking for money, as is common in any culture. But definitely there's a lot of fear, especially in the Chihuahua area at the moment. So that's sometimes when our families are coming here from that area, it could be for that reason. Next slide. So education was originally a big reason for moving from country to country. When they settled in Canada, there was a privilegium, or an understanding that there was a privilegium signed with the Canadian government. And that agreement is between government and our LGM, where they would be, the agreement would be that they could have their own schools, their own churches, and sort of stay separate from the government and have their own governing within their colonies or their villages. And the understanding when they moved to Canada was that this same privilegium was in place here. However, when they arrived, it was not, and there was a lot of pressure for children to attend the public schools and for basically assimilation to happen. So originally when there was that mass faith-based move from Canada to Mexico, a large part of that would have been because of the wanting to educate their children in their own way. Currently in Mexico, and this is changing slowly, even in Mexico, but the average age for girls to attend school would have been from age 5 to 12 years of age, or until they have their first period, at which time they would be kept home. And for boys, the average age is from 5 to 14, at which point they would then be expected to help out on the family farm. And the belief has always been that their children would be taught all that they needed to know at home. So it wasn't that they were against education. It was just that whatever they were expecting to enter into as far as employment was usually on the family farm, and of course for girls to just be stay-at-home moms, so then mom can teach them everything they need to know. And this view is changing, has changed a lot. It's not a fast change, but it is coming. Families are starting to realize, especially if they want to make a living here in Canada, that education is important. So families are encouraging, or even just allowing their children to attend school for longer periods of time, if nothing else than to finish high school. My family was not one of those families. My dad was not for education, so I went to work instead of going to high school. My sister, that's a year younger than me, pushed her way through high school, but she had to fight for it tooth and nail, and she sort of paved the way for some of the younger siblings. And so the younger children have been able to complete their high school and even go further. As I mentioned earlier, I did get my GED once we'd moved out to Alberta, which has been about 18, 19 years now that we've been in Alberta. which by the way looks a lot like Durango, Mexico when it hasn't rained here for a while, with all of the tumbleweeds and the mountains and the prairies. It felt like home quite a bit when we arrived. So for the kids going to school only for those years, whatever they've learned as far as even High German, if they're not utilizing it after those years, then they're losing it. And that's why we see a lot of illiteracy in the adults that we work with today. If you were to go to Chihuahua, Mexico now, though, there's a lot of our LGM are sending their kids to school where they're learning fluently High German, Low German, Spanish, English. And so the next generation coming up when they come here will definitely be better off in that sense. So education, as I said earlier, has not always been seen as a priority. It is changing slowly. And that's not to say they're not learning. These pictures on the right are pictures that I took in Paraguay, would have been about 6-7 years ago. And they're my young cousins. My grandma had passed away, and so Grandpa, with his grieving, was not able to take care of the farm. And these two children and their younger siblings were running the entire farm. So they're very capable, very smart, and definitely not lacking. I think about my 10-year-old, and he would never be able to run a farm. In fact, if you look at how my younger sister was raised differently than myself even, there's a huge difference. So, but views are changing with each generation. There's more and more kids here in Canada that are completing high school, which is very exciting. Next slide, please. So I work with Alberta Health Services, and therefore my presentation does sort of lean towards the health side of things. If there's other questions at the end, I'll be happy to answer them. But for now, pregnancy, prenatal, and postnatal, these are some, like pregnancy for sure is definitely a very hush-hush topic. Mom won't discuss it with her kids. And if she's somewhere in public or somewhere at a clinic and she's got young kids with her, it's best not to address her pregnancy unless she's bringing it up. Obviously, if she's at an appointment regarding her pregnancy, then that's something that has to be talked about. But if you're just running into her at Superstore or somewhere and you're talking about her pregnancy with her kids around, that will make her very uncomfortable. It's such a hush-hush topic that they don't even have a word for it in Low German. They will just say, I'm in a different time, or I am so, and then we get to figure it out from there. It isn't discussed with kids, as I said, but it's also not usually discussed openly with anyone. So for them to talk to us about it at a clinic, in a clinic setting, obviously has to happen, but for them to just talk about their pregnancy with friends, and that wouldn't happen very often either. Again, don't generalize. All families won't have this. There will be the occasional LGM family that will tell their kids that they're pregnant or expecting a baby, but generally it's not discussed. Prenatal care is often started late in pregnancy. A couple of reasons for that. One is in Mexico, it's not the norm to start that early with prenatal care. And also here in Canada, being that they're usually living in rural areas and excuse me, most of the moms can't drive. They don't have a driver's license. They may not have a second vehicle. And therefore, the husband would often have to take off work to bring his wife to appointments. And of course, the more they take off, the more afraid they are that their boss will be upset and maybe fire them or find somebody else or lay them off or not rehire them once the season starts again. There's definitely a lot of fear around that. So they can come in a little bit later, and then hopefully the husband can bring them. We aren't able to transport clients. We just meet them at the clinic and interpret there. We're hoping to get some things in place for transportation going forward, but at the moment we don't have anything that I'm aware of. Next slide, please. I should just mention my mom was pregnant with my youngest sister, and I was usually the interpreter for the family. And so the one day my mom, there was a phone call. My mom was having a nap, so I answered, and it was the clinic. And they asked for her. I said she wasn't available, but that I usually interpret anyway, so they could just leave me a message. And she, the nurse said, okay, if you could let your mom know she's pregnant. Her pregnancy test came back positive. So I hung up the phone, and my mom had heard it ringing, and she was wondering who it was, and I told her it was a wrong number because I had never talked to her about it. any such thing, and I wasn't sure how to do so then either. So I went back to the kitchen, did the dishes, and figured this was probably information she needed to have. So as I walked past her on the way to my room, I just told her, "You're pregnant," and she said, "Okay." And after that, a couple weeks later, I just started to ask her questions about it. I knew some of my Canadian friends would talk to their parents about pregnancy, and they knew when they were expecting a baby. And so my mom was very uncomfortable with it at first, but after a while, I was attending appointments with her, and this was baby number 13. She did have one pass away, which is why there's only 12, but she still didn't really understand a whole lot about the whole process and her body and stuff. So I started to read pamphlets with her and translate for her at appointments, I guess in preparation for this position, which of course I didn't know about back then. So female health and sexual health in general is also a very private matter. Menstruation or puberty is not openly discussed. Generally, they would wait until their children are getting married, and then they may or may not get a little talk. Most of the time they are left to figure it out on their own, which can be, I mean, we all know they figure it out eventually, but it's definitely challenging, especially for young girls getting their period for the first time and not knowing what's happening. In the school setting, sexual education is generally not permitted. There's usually a consent form that goes home that is then, they're just going to pull their kids out for those days of school if they have to, if they don't understand how to communicate with the school. We have had some schools approach us and ask how they could modify these classes and still have some health teaching for the kids. There's some schools, like there's a school in Barron's, John Davidson in Coaldale, and Iron Springs has Huntsville School. They are schools that are largely or only LGM students, and they would just not offer that class at all in the hopes to retain the families, because at least they're getting an education then. So we're still working around that. Trudy and I have had the pleasure of going to many ESL classes where we talk to the moms about their health and their bodies and how everything works, and we've often asked, now that they have an understanding, would they teach their children rather than letting them figure it out on their own? And usually the answer is yes. None of them really appreciated the lack of information that they grew up with. So my theory is that if they don't have the knowledge and or the terminology to even talk about it, then how can they? So hopefully as we are able to provide more education, this will change over time. Next slide, please. So we did, pregnancies are often very close together. For a long time, and especially in the area that I grew up in the church that I grew up in, birth control was not allowed. It was considered murder in a sense, that you were preventing or terminating a pregnancy. They were not permitted to be on birth control according to the church. Nowadays, though, our families from Chihuahua mostly have been given, I wouldn't say permission, but they're able to take the doctor's advice. So if they are told by their family doctor or by their gynecologist that they should wait, they should have more time in between, or that their body isn't ready, etc., then they are able to be on birth control. So because of the belief around birth control, many did have lots of children, like my parents having 13 children. I've known families that have 24 or more kids from one set of parents. So definitely a lot of hardships that comes with that, and financial stress. Alcoholic cravings, we've had some clients tell us that when their body is craving something, they believe that their body needs whatever it is they're craving, which if it's chocolate, I'm all for it. But we do a lot of teaching around alcohol and not being safe in pregnancy. So they're often going to admit that they had one swallow of beer, knowing that they shouldn't have alcohol in pregnancy, but they believe their body needed it. So again, we're hoping to make more videos in Low German, and this would be one of the topics we're hoping to cover. Always looking for more funds, of course, to fund these videos. There's lots of postnatal support within the community. It is easier for this support in Mexico, being that they live in their own little villages, and as I said earlier, they're called colonies, but they wouldn't be colonies like the Hutterites here. It's not communal living. It's a colony or a village with only LGM in the village. However, they all have their own property, their own land, their own lives. There's the only thing they would do together as a community is if there's a funeral or weddings. Otherwise, they're each one, every man for himself or every family for himself. So postnatal care here in Canada looks a little bit differently, being that our families are spread so far and wide in the rural areas. So you can't just walk next door to your sisters or have your mom come from down the street. It's a little more difficult for our families to support each other. The church generally does set up a meal list where families are dropping off meals, and mom usually will have, if possible, a live-in nanny or somebody to come and help in the home for 2 to 3 weeks. Postpartum depression is something we see quite often, but there's also a lack of understanding around postpartum depression or depression in general. It is a bit of a community that believes a pill fixes everything, so they're quick to reach for an antidepressant, and we're hoping to do more teaching around other things that can help with depression, like talking to a friend or going for a walk, or your overall health and healthy eating and exercising and things like that. Children are told that babies are bought at the hospital, and so when we're with a client in the clinic office or waiting room waiting, they will often ask their other children, so if we were to buy a baby, would you want a boy or a girl? Or, there's a poster on the wall with pictures of babies, which one should we buy? And I definitely remember thinking growing up, my parents could barely afford new shoes for us, and surely babies were more expensive, so why were they buying one every year? It didn't make a lot of sense. Next slide, please. So around health and illness in general, I don't know how many of you will have heard about the Mennonite chiropractor. We have it in quotations because that can mean many things. The chiropractor can be the dentist, the midwife, the actual chiropractor or masseuse, even a pharmacist. So in Mexico, for sure, it would look a little different than here. They would have their own, or not their own, they would have medication that they can prescribe on the spot and sell on the spot that could have been repackaged. There may not be enough communication, being that everything would be in Spanish in Mexico. The families might not understand what it is that they're using or why. So often our families will come here and they're on a medication and they're not sure why, or they will order medication from Mexico if they're not getting what they think they need here. And so we try not to shut them down when they have that, because it's better for us to know what they're on than to have them feel like they can't disclose these medications that they're using. So they'll order things for their children to help them with not being so wild or crazy, as they would put it. So we're not always understanding what exactly it is that they're using. So if we have that relationship built to where we can ask them what it is that they're ordering, then that way at least we can inform the doctor. The chiropractors here are generally just a masseuse chiropractor. They can also be in like a naturopathic person, and what's frustrating for us and the clients is we can have a client call us up and say, my chiropractor told me there's something wrong with my gallbladder, for example, and they'd like to go to the doctor and have it confirmed or checked out, and then the doctor will say everything came back normal. And so there's that, who do we believe? Is the chiropractor right? Is the doctor right? So it's a little frustrating for all involved. There's a lot of home remedies. I had one mom whose child had a fever and other things going on, and she said she put cottage cheese on the baby's chest, cold cottage cheese, and that fixed everything, which whatever works, right? But there's definitely a lot of home remedies. Prescriptions, like I said, they'll order medication from Mexico. In Mexico, you can get Prozac, antibiotics, antidepressants just by walking into the pharmacy. You don't need a prescription, and you can buy them usually from this chiropractor as well. Addictions, we see families addicted to medications that they weren't aware were addictive, and of course alcohol and tobacco. There's a bit of a looking the other way that happens with teenagers. They're able to smoke and drink and all that, but they're expected to quit that when they get married or baptized. So in order to get married, they have to get baptized first. So the expectation is there that they will then mend their ways and leave all of that behind. But of course, as we know with addictions, it's not always that easy. There is now a place in Mexico called Centrum where our families can go as a family unit and get help for addictions. There's, I believe they go for, maybe it's 3 months. So husband and wife and children will go and they'll all learn. It's a faith-based system there. We have quite a few clients that have attended. Usually though, as what we see quite often is whoever it is that's addicted is being dropped off against their will. So as we all know, if it's something that they're not ready to change, then it doesn't usually last. The church is not equipped generally to deal with addictions. However, that is usually the first, I would say, place they would seek help. So if there's issues in the family, they're trained or taught to go to the church first. And of course, the church will do what they can, but there needs to be more, I guess, specific supports in place for those with addictions, and the church at this time is not equipped for that. So as we talked about earlier, antidepressants are quite common. Now the families that Trudy and I work with are usually very new here. They're not established yet, so there's going to be a lot of stress involved. They've moved to a country that many of them have never been to. They don't know the law of the land. They don't know the system. They're financially strapped. They're living out in the boonies, don't have anybody nearby. Dad's working sun up to sundown to try and support the family, and it's a lot of stress. I mean, for every one of us, if we were to move to another country, it would be challenging for sure. And so antidepressants is something that they will either bring with them from Mexico or order, or they'll go to their family doctor through us and ask for antidepressants. And again, we're just trying to get some more teaching around the other things that can help alleviate that stress, and just to talk about some of the mental health issues that many of us face no matter what culture we're from, and how we can work with that other than a medication or in conjunction with medications. Special needs, can be a belief, especially in the more conservative families, that if you have a child with special needs, you've either done something to deserve this child, you've done something wrong, sinful. And again, for sure, once you have a special needs child, this is your lot in life. This is your burden to bear. You wouldn't ask for help. You wouldn't expect that child necessarily to function in the community like your other children would. So when our kids here in Canada with special needs have aids in school, and they are worked with by various service providers to try and get them as much a part of the community or as in the world as we can, it's a new concept for our families. In Mexico, this child wouldn't go to school. They would just stay at home, never maybe come to their full, can't find that word in my head now, maybe wouldn't ever be a part of society or contributing to society, might not be expected to marry ever, and so forth. So our families definitely aren't very comfortable, I would say, at best. We had a family whose child had Down syndrome, and to have respite care in place, for example, made her uncomfortable. She believed that this child was hers to take care of and she shouldn't burden anybody else with it. Oral health is something that we work with a lot with our families. There's definitely a lack of knowledge and education in this department. A lot of our families will have rampant decay in their mouths, children, adults, everybody. They may have seen a dentist in Mexico, and you will see a lot of the silver cap or the grading that gets put on their teeth. And of course, it's not done properly, and so food is getting behind there and decay is happening. And then just the whole understanding of not giving your child a bottle past a certain age, or not putting juice or pop in the bottle, and the effects of having too much candy and things like that. So there's a lot of teaching that needs to happen. I had one family whose 4-year-old had to have all his teeth pulled because there was so much decay in his mouth, and we were doing some teaching with mom after on what kind of foods she could feed him that would help him to recover faster, and things that would be easier to eat. And she said, I know, I can buy Fruit Loops because that's made from fruit, it's healthy, and I can just put some milk in it and make it nice and soft, and that'll be good. So again, just an example of how hard it can be for our families to really get the information they need. Obviously, the box says Fruit Loops, but we all know better. We know that it's more candy than food. However, with their limited English and literacy skills, that makes it difficult for our families. Next slide, please. Relationships, there's definitely some strong family values. They eat dinner together every night, which is something that I know even on the new Canada Food Guide is something that we would like to see more families do. So definitely a good strong family value. Everybody contributes in the house. Everybody has their role. Everybody helps out, whether it be you're supporting the family by working and financially supporting, or you're helping out at home with the children or the housework, all of that. I definitely would say that I appreciate that I was raised that way. Everybody's in the family, not one person not contributing, etc. And of course, when you have 12 children, there's always a lot to do, so we definitely all had to be all hands on deck. Children often can be sort of, there's to be seen and not heard. So if there's a family gathering, the parents will eat first and then they'll feed the children. Whereas I know for myself, I'm used to, in the later years, getting together at family gatherings. Now we feed the young kids first and then mom and dad can eat. Elders are respected. They would be, in most places, we would, sorry, I can't think of the word to say now. We would address them, there you go, we would address them differently. I wouldn't say you, I would say thee, for example. Trudy didn't grow up that way. Her parents didn't enforce that. My parents definitely did. So when I'm talking to a client that is older than me, then I will address them differently. Parenting is usually a shared role. However, dad is usually more of the discipliner. So of course we heard that lots when dad gets home, just you wait. There's definitely a different belief in parenting, and we are also working on just providing our families with more resources around parenting, and hopefully we can make some good inroads there. Oftentimes we'll get a call from a client, they want to book an appointment for their child, and they say that their child is always angry and acting up, and they believe that it's a health issue and not so much a behavior thing. So we have done some Triple P parenting education, and I know that there's a video in Low German already on YouTube around Triple P that was created by FCSS. So definitely some resources already available, and we hope to have more soon. Discipline, growing up, of course, we were always spanked, so there's discipline topics that we talk to our families about. There's a lot of fear for families when they come to Canada. They believe that if they make one wrong move, the kids will be taken away from them, etc. So they're pretty careful to the point where they wouldn't buckle them into the car seat properly because they don't want the child to be upset. So definitely, again, like I said, more education that could take place. Men's roles and women's roles are very defined, which there's definitely security in that. They know what their role is and what's expected of them. What we do tend to see is the depression can go up, especially if the man can't find work or if he's overworked and for a lower wage. And for mom, of course, if she's at home all by herself, isolated with her children, this is her role. She's not to be working outside the home, and therefore things can get pretty lonesome and stressful all by herself. And of course for mom too, once the children are grown and moved out, that was her sole purpose in life, was to be a mom and of course a wife. But if the husband's always working, then we definitely see some gaps there for our moms, our old ladies that have no more children at home. So there's some programming that is taking place through ESL classes that we are hoping more of our families will take part of. But we definitely see the depression rate going up in those areas. Next slide, please. So this is, I had the shorter version today of our presentation. If any of you are interested in having the longer version, I was told to keep it to 45 minutes. I think I've done not too bad, but if anybody is interested, I can always, or we can always provide a presentation more in depth to a group of people. But our key messages for you guys would be not to paint the whole population with the same brush. There is a lot of diversity. You can have so many variances within the LGM community. Trudy and I and Dan Dirksen from Palliser Regional Schools often present together, the three of us, and that's a prime example of how much diversity there is within the community. We're all LGM, we speak the same language, but our stories are so different, our experiences are so different. So when you have a family in your office, or you're working with a family, or you have a neighbor that's LGM, get to know them personally, build relationship with them. I would say the number one way to make inroads into this community is to build that relationship. There is distrust for service providers. There can be distrust for doctors. We recently had a lady from Southern Alberta release a video on YouTube in Low German on the evils of immunization and how sinful it is, and then also mentioning doctors and how doctors can sometimes keep the truth from you or lie to you and that sort of thing. So we're working on currently a video to get the truth out, to correct those lies, and it'll be in Low German and hopefully available on YouTube soon. But definitely building relationship and trust is key. If you want to invite a family to a program that you're running, or provide them with a service and they're not buying in, definitely working on that relationship first will help. Respecting their culture. Now that you've all gotten a little bit of information on the culture, definitely look into it further with the links that will be shared after. But anytime you're working with a group of people, it's good to understand their culture, to understand the why. Why do they do this? Why don't they do this? And then maybe you can reach them on a different level. And respect is felt, not just heard. So if you're working with these families, have patience. Maybe get us to interpret for initial appointments if needed. We are quite busy. However, we are open to helping wherever we can as far as medical related issues. There are a few other people we can refer you to that also speak Low German and work for various government agencies that can assist with interpreting when it comes to government forms or AISH applications and things like that. So make your message simple and relevant. Plain English, less wordy, use pictures. If you're trying to promote a program and you have a poster, pictures go a long way. We've often been asked to interpret or to translate forms and posters. But like I said earlier, because of the illiteracy in all languages, we find that it's best to put it in plain, simple English. And if we have a picture with, and we have some stock photos of a family in the traditional dress, then the families will know that that information is geared towards them. And if they can't understand it, the majority, or I would say all of them in this day and age, have smartphones. They will take a picture of it and find somebody that understands and can help them to understand it. We often get WhatsApp messages from, or I do from my clients, a picture of something that they've either read somewhere or somebody sent to them, or a letter they got in the mail, and then we help them understand what it's all about. And again, ask why. If somebody is declining immunizations, or if they're not wanting to take part in a program that you're offering, ask them why. Maybe it's that they're afraid there's fine print that they didn't understand. Maybe they're afraid that it's not free, or that this will commit them to something that they don't understand. So if you're asking why and helping them to communicate to you what their reasons would be for declining something, oftentimes that can change their answer. You may often hear that they, especially if you're talking to the wife or mom, that she may say, I need to talk to my husband first. And being that the man is the head of the house. However, just like the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where it says he may be the head, but I'm the neck and I can turn the head any way I want. In the same way, our families, if you can convince mom that something's a good idea for her children, she most likely will convince her husband as well, although he does have the final say traditionally. So that's my presentation, and I'll open the floor to questions. This is our contact information, so feel free to, I don't know if you can screenshot it, or I guess it was sent out, Stasha.
Yes.
But for sure, give us a call, send us an email, and we'll see how we can help you.
There's a couple comments in the chat box. Can you see that, Tina?
I am just going to click on that.
Yeah.
I was ignoring it so I wouldn't get distracted.
You did awesome.
Okay. Let's see. Do you offer information sessions for the general public, employers, community members? There seems to be a lack of understanding and misconceptions about LGSM. Yeah, for sure, we can offer that. We will be running or having a LGM service provider conference in November 19th and 20th, so mark those on your calendar. We will be sending out save the dates, and at this it'll be a 2-day conference, and we'll be talking about everything LGM. So if you're able to make it, that'd be wonderful. We can, we'll have not something. It won't be a presentation like this, but if you can't make it to November, that event in November, then we can for sure offer another time to do this. Usually it's about an hour and a half that we would present if there's 2 of us.
Where will the conference be?
It'll be in Tabor at the, what is that? I can't remember the name of the building now. It's that inn or that hotel where all these different events are always held at.
Heritage Inn.
Thank you. Heritage Inn. I believe there will be, there will be a cost, but I'm not 100% sure if it's $60, but it is for 2 days and meals would be included. We'll have lots of speakers, some coming from Mexico to speak, and just to get some good understanding on the LGM culture. So I have worked with social services and police in the area of the question is, can you comment on working with LGSM families in instances of allegations of child physical or sexual abuse? So unfortunately, this is something that does happen in this community, in any culture really, but it is something that, again, they would go to the church with first. If somebody's aware of abuse, they would be reported to the church, and the church will reprimand and tell the abuser not to do it again, and if they do it again, that there will be serious consequences, and those consequences can be excommunication or a talking to, or that they would have to admit their sins to everybody in front of the church, that sort of thing. Here in Canada, obviously things are different, and our families, or we've had a few families where we've had to deal with the police in that area, so we are happy to interpret. We don't have any plans in the works right now as far as videos around this topic, but we hope to include that in the parenting videos that we're hoping to create. Was there a specific question you had about that, Erin?
I've unmuted. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay. Yeah, just some of the information about how families don't talk about sexual or physical health really much at all. And when allegations like this are made, they're usually quite serious by the time they get to either teachers or police officers or other authorities. And so, I'm wondering about how to approach or how to work with families if a member of the family is the perpetrator, if they come in with really strongly held beliefs about corporal punishment of children and that sort of thing. I know this is a very big set of questions that I'm asking, but sometimes these families end up having to work with people who are trying to educate them a bit about what's expected for how to treat children or correct children in Canada.
Yeah, so I can just give an example of a family that I worked with. For sure, he was sexually abusing his daughters, and the girls were quite young still, and mom was very happy in the end that this had been brought to light, because she wanted to get help for her kids but didn't know how. They'd gone to the church multiple times, and somebody in the children's school had actually reported them. So it's definitely a very uncomfortable process for everybody involved, being that they don't talk about anything sexual. But we had to just lay it all out and say, you know what, we have to talk about this. We have to tell the girls that they have to set boundaries for themselves. You're not allowed to touch them. You're not allowed to be in the house with them by themselves. We had to the kids had to draw pictures of what happened, and so definitely very uncomfortable for all involved. But if it has to be, and our families understand that if they're going to get into trouble with the law in this way here in Canada, that you no longer can hold to those beliefs of not talking about it. It has to be talked about. And a lot of what we did end up working with the family is helping them to understand the benefits and the in the area of counseling and why it's good to talk about it and what it does in the brain if you don't talk about it, and how this behavior will continue and even go into the next generation if it's not dealt with. So it was a lot of uncomfortable silences, but I believe that in the end we helped this family a great deal, and so in turn hopefully they can help others. I know that there was other family members in the perpetrator's history or background that was experiencing the same thing. So it's something that's not going to change overnight, and we will just, I guess, have to work with one family at a time. It is a community of where it spreads, word spreads by mouth really quickly. So if we can find or build trust and relationship with our families as we're working with them on these sensitive topics, then hopefully they're going to share that with others as well. Let's see. Sylvie says, any work done to provide info education to the LGSM community about genetic disease due to, and I don't even know if I can say that word. We haven't done any work ourselves yet in that area. We're always working with our families one-on-one when there's genetics, and providing interpretation that way. It would probably be a great topic to do a video on, and we have a long list of topics already, but we can certainly add that. So far, it's just been one-on-one education with our families. And yes, Erin, it does take time to build that trust around these topics and around any topics, even something as simple as us helping them at the doctor's office to interpret. I know within the community there's mistrust even with each other. If I'm interpreting for my sister, for example, at the doctor's office, I may share that information with somebody else. We will have clients ask us, who was the client you were here with before me and what was wrong with them? And so we of course always talk about confidentiality, and that just as they wouldn't want their story shared, we can't share somebody else's story. So it's a new concept, even that, for them. So, but that's helping us to build relationship with them. They appreciate that we're not going to talk about their story to somebody else. And so even just that within the community is a new, teaching them to look at things differently. And Sherry, I think the presentation was sent out. I can send you the long version though.
Okay, thank you.
Any last questions? Laura, did you want to finish us off?
Sure. Thank you very much, Tina. The information was very helpful, and thank you for presenting today, and Stasha as well. We will hope to have this posted on our webpage, which is lethbridgeimmigration.ca, but I think Stasha will send that out. We have a little technical difficulties, but we're hoping that will alleviate that very soon. And we're hoping to do some more of these in the future. So thank you very much for sharing your hour with us, and thank you to Tina and Stasha for being with us for this hour as well.
Thank you, Stasha and Laura. And what I could do, if need be, Stasha, if you like, I can put those links that I was talking about right in the conversation here, and then that way people can just copy and paste it. Or do you want me to send it out in an email and you can forward that to everybody?
Why don't you copy and paste it?
Okay.
And so everybody that's here, the ones that stayed to the end, they get that.
There you go.
All right. So Tina's going to put the links in for further information. I will send you an email with a link to SurveyMonkey to get some feedback. We will be, oh, great. Thank you, Tina. planning for our next one, probably October, we're thinking. And we're planning to continue series, education series with the webinars with the Lethbridge Newcomer Health Advisory Group. So there's the link.
That's 3 links actually. Is it showing up as 3? Because that should be a YouTube video, and then one that's more education based, that mennoniteeducation.weebly.com, and then there's the openingdoors.co.
Okay.
Hopefully that worked. If anybody has any issues, you can definitely let me know. And then yes, I can share the November conference and when that's available. Stasha, if I send that to you, the save the date, can you still send it out to everybody?
I can forward it on. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And
I'll send that to you as soon as I hang up here then.
A previous South Zone.
Sorry.
Nanette, who asked the question, she's smiling.
Oh.
Used to work with us in South Zone, so.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Hi, Nanette. All right. Yes, we miss you too. All right. Thanks, everybody, and have a good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.